Jonathan's life seemed to be a flawless picture of success. His marriage to Emily was the envy of their suburban neighborhood, their two-story house a symbol of their stability. But lately, Jonathan had begun to sense something unsettling beneath the surface. Emily had always been attentive, but recently, there were subtle changes, moments where she seemed distant, almost as if her mind was elsewhere. It started with small things, a missed dinner conversation, a forgotten anniversary plan, and late-night phone calls she brushed off as work-related. Jonathan tried to ignore the growing sense of unease, but a feeling of dread gnawed at him. One afternoon, while tidying up the attic, Jonathan stumbled upon an old, dusty box. He hadn't seen it before and felt a strange compulsion to open it. Inside, he found a collection of letters and photographs that didn't fit with the life he knew. They depicted a younger Emily, carefree and laughing with people he had never met. The letters, however, were the real shock, filled with cryptic references to events and people Jonathan had never heard of. There was one letter, in particular, signed with the initial D, that spoke of betrayal and a tragic event that seemed to haunt the writer. Jonathan's heart pounded as he realized that Emily had a hidden past, one she had never shared with him. That night, Jonathan lay awake, the contents of the box racing through his mind. The perfect life he thought he had built suddenly felt fragile, as though it could crumble at any moment. Who were these people in the photos? What was the tragic event mentioned in the letters? And why had Emily never spoken of it? The questions swirled in his mind, but he was too afraid to confront Emily directly. Instead, he decided to wait and observe, hoping that the answers would reveal themselves in time. But the more he tried to ignore the growing tension, the more it consumed him, until he could no longer distinguish between paranoia and reality. The mysterious box in the attic haunted Jonathan. Emily's recent behavior, her late-night phone calls, the distant look in her eyes, suddenly took on a more sinister meaning. As days passed, Jonathan became increasingly paranoid, his mind racing with possibilities. Was Emily hiding something from him? Was there another side to her, one he had never known? He started noticing more oddities, a small, locked drawer in her study, a second phone that she kept hidden. Each discovery deepened his suspicions. One night, Jonathan woke to the sound of Emily's hushed voice. She was downstairs, talking urgently on the phone. He crept to the top of the stairs, straining to hear. "I told you not to contact me," she whispered. "This can't come out now." Not after everything. Jonathan's heart raced. Who was she talking to? What couldn't come out? His mind spun with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. When Emily hung up and returned to bed, she seemed unaware of Jonathan's mounting fear. He watched her sleep, the woman he thought he knew now a stranger in his own home. The next day, Jonathan's anxiety grew. He began following Emily, watching her every move, convinced that something was terribly wrong. He noticed she was more secretive than ever, often leaving the house without explanation. Once, he followed her to a small cafe on the outskirts of town. She met with a man Jonathan didn't recognize, and their conversation seemed intense, almost heated. When Jonathan confronted Emily later, she brushed it off as a business meeting, but her explanation felt hollow. The sense of unease that had started as a whisper was now a deafening roar in Jonathan's mind. The box in the attic became an obsession for Jonathan. He couldn't stop thinking about it, the cryptic letters, the photos of Emily with people he didn't know. His fear of confronting her directly led him to a more insidious approach. He began searching for clues around the house, looking for anything that could explain what he had found. One day, while Emily was out, he decided to pick the lock on the small drawer in her study. Inside, he found a hidden journal filled with entries from years before they had met. The entries were written in a hurried, almost frantic style, detailing a life that Jonathan had never imagined. The journal spoke of a man named David, someone who had once been very close to Emily. The entries detailed a passionate, but ultimately destructive, relationship. There were references to a woman named Lydia, and a tragic accident that had torn their lives apart. The more Jonathan read, the more he realized that Emily had been at the center of a scandal, one that involved betrayal, lies, and a death that still haunted her. The journal ended abruptly, with an entry that simply read, "I can never forgive myself for what happened. It must remain buried forever." Jonathan's hands shook as he closed the journal. The Emily he knew was gone, replaced by a woman with a dark, hidden past. The tragic accident, the betrayal, none of it matched the image of the loving wife he thought he knew. He felt sick to his stomach, realizing that their entire marriage might have been built on lies. But despite his fear, he couldn't bring himself to confront her directly. Instead, he decided to dig deeper, hoping to uncover the full truth before taking action. Little did he know, the more he uncovered, the darker the truth would become. The weight of his discovery was unbearable. Jonathan knew he couldn't keep this to himself any longer. That evening, as they sat in the living room, the tension between them thickened like a storm cloud. Jonathan finally gathered the courage to speak. "Emily, I found something in the attic," he began, his voice shaking. "Letters, photos, a journal. Who is David? And what happened to Lydia?" Emily's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, she said nothing, as if she was trying to decide how much to reveal. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Jonathan, that's a part of my life I've tried to forget. I didn't want you to know because it was so painful, so damaging. David was someone I was close to, but it ended badly. Lydia, she was a friend, but things got complicated. There was an accident, and she died. It was my fault, and I've never forgiven myself." Her words were rushed, her eyes darting nervously as if she was trying to gauge his reaction. Jonathan felt a surge of anger and betrayal. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded. "How could you keep something like this from me?" Emily's eyes filled with tears. "Because I didn't want to lose you, Jonathan. I was afraid that if you knew the truth, you would see me differently, that you wouldn't love me anymore. I've tried to move on, to bury the past, but it's always there, haunting me." Jonathan's heart ached as he listened to her, but he couldn't shake the feeling that she was still hiding something. The journal had mentioned more secrets, betrayals, things left unsaid. Could he ever trust her again? Or was their marriage doomed to be haunted by the ghosts of her past? Unable to shake the feeling that Emily was still hiding something, Jonathan made a difficult decision. He hired a private investigator. He felt a deep sense of betrayal as he handed over the letters, photographs, and journal entries, but he couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. The investigator, Ray, was discreet and professional, assuring Jonathan that he would uncover the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. As days turned into weeks, Jonathan's anxiety grew. He found himself constantly on edge, jumping every time the phone rang, wondering if it was Ray with news. Emily, unaware of Jonathan's suspicions, continued to act as though everything was normal. But to Jonathan, her every word, every gesture, seemed like a lie. He began to avoid her, spending more time at work or out of the house, unable to face the woman he once loved so deeply. Finally, Ray called with an update. His voice was serious, almost grim. "Jonathan, I've found something. It's complicated. Emily was involved in a scandal years ago, something that was covered up at the time but had devastating consequences. It involved David, Lydia, and another man named Marcus. The details are still unclear, but it appears that the accident was not as straightforward as it seemed. There were lies, betrayals, and there's a possibility that Lydia's death was not entirely accidental. Jonathan's blood ran cold as he listened. The truth was darker than he had ever imagined, and he realized that he was only beginning to scratch the surface of Emily's hidden life. The information from Ray left Jonathan reeling. He had expected to find secrets, but nothing like this. Emily's past was not just a series of mistakes, it was a tangled web of lies and betrayals that had led to tragedy. The mention of Marcus, a name he hadn't come across before, added another layer of mystery. Who was this man, and what role had he played in the events that had unfolded all those years ago? Jonathan's mind raced as he tried to piece together the fragments of information he had. According to Ray, Marcus had been involved with both Emily and Lydia, and his presence had complicated an already volatile situation. The more Jonathan thought about it, the more he realized that Emily's past was far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. He began to wonder if Lydia's death had truly been an accident or if there was something more sinister at play. The possibility that Emily had been involved in something criminal, or at least complicit in a cover-up, terrified him. Jonathan knew he couldn't keep this to himself any longer. He needed to confront Emily, but this time, he had to be prepared for whatever the truth might be. He decided to gather more information before taking action. He reached out to Ray, asking him to dig deeper into Marcus's background and his connection to Emily. As he waited for more answers, the tension in the house grew unbearable. Every time he looked at Emily, he saw a stranger, a woman with a dark, hidden life that was slowly coming to light. He knew that once the full truth was revealed, there would be no going back. Desperate for more answers, Jonathan decided to reach out to someone who might have more insight into what had happened all those years ago, Sarah, an old friend of Emily's who had been part of the same social circle. He tracked her down with Ray's help and arranged to meet her at a quiet cafe. When Sarah arrived, Jonathan could see the years of pain and regret etched into her face. She had been close to both Lydia and Emily, and the events that had unfolded had left deep scars on everyone involved. As they talked, Sarah's reluctance to revisit the past was palpable, but Jonathan's desperation won her over. She began to recount the events of that fateful time, confirming much of what Jonathan had already learned. But then she added something that made his blood run cold. Marcus, he was trouble from the start, she said, her voice trembling. He had a hold over both Lydia and Emily, and he knew how to manipulate them. The affair, the lies, it all spiraled out of control because of him. And when Lydia found out the truth, she confronted Emily and David. That's when the accident happened. But she hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. Jonathan leaned forward, his heart pounding. But what, Sarah? What aren't you telling me? Sarah looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. I've never told anyone this, but I don't think the accident was an accident. Lydia was furious, out of control. But Marcus, he was there that night, too. And I think he pushed her over the edge, maybe even caused the crash. He was always in the background, pulling the strings, and I think he wanted to hurt them all. Emily, she's been carrying the guilt, but I don't think she even knows the full truth. Jonathan felt a wave of nausea. The more he learned, the darker the story became. He realized that Marcus might be the key to everything, and that confronting him could be the most dangerous thing he had ever done. The meeting with Sarah left Jonathan shaken. The idea that Marcus had been involved in Lydia's death, and that Emily might not even know the full truth, was terrifying. But it also gave him a new sense of purpose. He needed to confront Marcus, to find out what really happened that night, and to protect Emily from whatever danger still lurked in the shadows. But before he could take action, he needed to know more about Marcus and his connection to Emily. Jonathan returned to Ray, asking him to dig deeper into Marcus's background. The information Ray uncovered was disturbing. Marcus had a history of manipulation, coercion, and violence. He had been involved in several scandals, using his influence to control and exploit those around him. It became clear that Marcus had a hold over Emily and Lydia, and that he had been a central figure in the events leading up to Lydia's death. Jonathan realized that confronting Marcus would be dangerous, but he had no choice. He needed to protect Emily, and to do that, he had to uncover the full truth. As Jonathan prepared for the confrontation, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into a trap. He knew that Marcus was dangerous, and that he wouldn't hesitate to use whatever leverage he had to maintain control. But Jonathan also knew that he couldn't let fear stop him. He needed to face Marcus, to confront the man who had caused so much pain and suffering, and to find a way to protect Emily from the darkness that still threatened to consume her. The growing tension in their marriage became unbearable. Jonathan was consumed with the need to protect Emily and uncover the full truth, but he couldn't bring himself to tell her everything he had learned. He didn't want to burden her with the knowledge that Marcus was still a threat, that her past was even darker than she realized. But his silence only deepened the rift between them, and Emily could sense that something was terribly wrong. Their conversations became strained, filled with unspoken fears and unanswered questions. Emily tried to reach out to Jonathan, to bridge the growing distance between them, but he was too consumed with his own fears to respond. The man she had once trusted with her life now seemed like a stranger, someone who was slipping away from her with every passing day. She didn't understand why, but she could feel the love they had shared slipping through her fingers. One evening, after yet another tense and silent dinner, Emily finally broke down. "Jonathan, please, talk to me," she begged, tears streaming down her face. "I know something's wrong. I can feel it. Whatever it is, we can work through it together. But I can't do this alone." Jonathan looked at her, his heart breaking, but he still couldn't bring himself to tell her everything. Instead, he muttered something about work stress and walked away, leaving Emily alone with her tears. The distance between them was growing by the day, and Jonathan knew that if he didn't find a way to fix things soon, their marriage would be lost forever. Unable to bear the weight of his secrets any longer, Jonathan decided it was time to confront Emily with everything he had learned. The moment came on a quiet evening, the tension between them thick enough to cut with a knife. Jonathan had been pacing the living room, his mind racing with everything Ray had uncovered. Finally, he turned to Emily, his voice trembling with the weight of the truth. "Emily, we need to talk," he began, his heart pounding. "I know about Marcus. I know about David, Lydia, and the accident. I know everything." Emily's face went pale, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, she didn't say anything, as if the words had knocked the breath out of her. Finally, she managed to whisper, How did you find out?" Jonathan's voice was steady, but filled with emotion. "I hired a private investigator. I needed to know the truth, Emily. And now I do. But I need you to tell me everything. No more secrets, no more lies. I need to know what really happened that night." Emily broke down, her shoulders shaking with sobs. "Jonathan, I never wanted you to find out like this," she cried. "I thought I could leave it all behind, that we could start fresh, but I was wrong. Marcus, he's dangerous. He had a hold over me, over all of us." That night, Lydia was furious. She found out about the affair, and she confronted David and me. Marcus was there too, and things got out of control. I've been carrying the guilt for years, but I don't even know the full truth. I don't know if Lydia's death was an accident or if he did something to cause it. Jonathan felt a surge of anger and betrayal, but also a deep sorrow for the woman he loved. He realized that Emily had been a victim too, trapped in a web of lies and manipulation. But the truth was out now, and there was no going back. "Emily, I'm not going to let Marcus control you anymore," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We're going to confront him together, and we're going to put an end to this once and for all." The truth, once revealed, unleashed a torrent of emotions between Jonathan and Emily. The love they had shared now felt like a fragile thing, struggling to survive under the weight of so many secrets. Jonathan felt betrayed, not just by Emily's past but by the fact that she had kept it hidden for so long. Emily, on the other hand, was racked with guilt and shame, knowing that her actions had brought them to this point. The tension between them was unbearable, and it seemed that their marriage was hanging by a thread. Unable to face Emily, Jonathan left the house that night. He drove aimlessly, his mind a storm of conflicting emotions. Anger, sadness, confusion, they all swirled together, leaving him feeling numb. He ended up at a hotel on the outskirts of town, booking a room with no clear idea of how long he would stay. The thought of returning home, of facing Emily again, was more than he could bear. He needed time to think, to process everything that had happened. But even as he sat in the sterile hotel room, staring at the blank walls, he couldn't escape the feeling of loss that gnawed at him. Meanwhile, Emily was left alone in their empty house, the silence echoing around her like a hollow shell. She had known this day would come, had feared it ever since she decided to keep her past a secret. But now that it was here, the reality was more devastating than she had imagined. The love of her life was gone, driven away by the very thing she had tried so hard to protect him from. The guilt, the regret, it was all-consuming, a weight she didn't know how to bear. She wandered through the house, aimless and lost, her heart breaking with every step. Jonathan's isolation was broken by an unexpected visit from his older brother, Michael. Always the voice of reason, Michael had a way of cutting through the noise and seeing things clearly. When he showed up at Jonathan's hotel room unannounced, Jonathan was too exhausted to argue. He let him in, bracing himself for the lecture he knew was coming. But Michael, ever the calm and composed one, didn't start with accusations or advice. Instead, he just sat with Jonathan, letting the silence speak for itself. After a while, Michael finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm. "I know you're hurting, John. And I know you feel betrayed. But you have to ask yourself, what do you want out of this? Do you want to walk away and never look back? Or do you want to find a way to move forward?" Jonathan stared at him, the weight of the question settling on his shoulders. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice heavy with emotion. "How can I move forward when everything I thought I knew was a lie?" Michael leaned forward, his expression serious. "Not everything was a lie, John. You have to remember that. Yes, Emily kept something from you, something huge, something that's hurt you deeply. But does that mean the love you've shared, the life you've built together, was all fake? Only you can answer that. But if there's any part of you that still loves her, that still wants to be with her, then you owe it to yourself to at least try. Jonathan was silent for a long time, Michael's words echoing in his mind. He knew his brother was right. He needed to decide what he wanted. Walking away would be easier in the short term, but the thought of losing Emily forever was too painful to bear. But staying, trying to rebuild their relationship, it would take more strength than he felt he had. The choice before him was agonizing, and no matter which path he chose, there would be no easy answers. Jonathan returned home, but the atmosphere between him and Emily was tense, fraught with the weight of everything that had happened. The house, once a place of warmth and love, now felt like a battleground, every corner filled with the echoes of their unspoken pain. Emily was overjoyed to see him, but there was a fragility in her demeanor, as if she were holding her breath, afraid that any wrong move would send him running again. Jonathan, for his part, was determined to try, but the task before them seemed insurmountable. The process of rebuilding trust was slow and painful. Every conversation was tinged with uncertainty, every touch tentative, as if they were both afraid of reopening old wounds. Jonathan struggled to reconcile the woman he loved with the woman who had kept such a dark secret from him. He found himself questioning everything, every memory, every promise, every word they had shared. Was it all tainted by the lies she had told? Or was there still something real between them, something worth fighting for? Emily, on the other hand, was racked with guilt and shame. She knew that the path to healing would be long and difficult, but she was willing to do whatever it took to make things right. She opened up to Jonathan more than she ever had before, sharing the details of her past, the choices she had made, and the pain she had carried with her all these years. It was a cathartic process, but also an incredibly painful one, as each revelation brought with it a fresh wave of grief and regret. Yet, through it all, there was a glimmer of hope, a hope that, with time and patience, they could find their way back to each other. After weeks of painful conversations and tentative steps toward healing, Emily made a suggestion that took Jonathan by surprise. "What if we moved?" she asked one evening as they sat together, the tension between them finally beginning to ease. "What if we left this place behind and started fresh somewhere new? This house, it's filled with so many memories, both good and bad. Maybe if we had a new start, in a new place, it would be easier to rebuild what we've lost." Jonathan considered her words, the idea both appealing and terrifying. On one hand, a new start could be exactly what they needed, a chance to leave behind the ghosts of the past and focus on the future. But on the other hand, running away felt like an admission of defeat, as if they were conceding that the life they had built together was beyond saving. Yet, as he looked around the house, he couldn't deny that it was filled with reminders of the pain they had endured. Maybe Emily was right, maybe a fresh start was exactly what they needed. After much discussion, they agreed to go for it. They began the process of packing up their belongings, preparing to leave behind the life they had known for so many years. There was a bittersweet quality to the process, as they sorted through old photos and mementos, each item a reminder of the life they had once shared. But there was also a sense of hope, a feeling that, by leaving this place behind, they were taking a step toward healing, toward a future where their love could thrive once more. Just as they were about to leave for their new life, an unexpected visitor arrived at their doorstep, a figure from Emily's past that she had hoped to never see again. Marcus, the man who had been involved in Lydia's death and who had manipulated Emily and others, had somehow tracked her down. Jonathan was out running errands when Marcus arrived, leaving Emily alone to face him. The sight of him standing on their porch sent a chill down her spine, a reminder that no matter how far she tried to run, her past would always find her. Marcus wasted no time getting to the point. "Emily, we need to talk," he said, his voice laced with a cold, threatening edge. "I know what you've been up to, trying to start fresh and all that. But there's something you need to understand. You can't just walk away from your past. And if you think you can, well, I'm here to remind you that you can't." His words were like a knife to her heart, cutting through the fragile sense of hope she had been clinging to. "What do you want, Marcus?" she asked, her voice trembling. The answer was simple: money. Marcus knew about the scandal, knew the details that could ruin Emily's life if they ever came to light. He had kept his silence all these years, but now he wanted something in return. "It's simple, Emily," he said, leaning in closer. "You give me what I want, and I keep my mouth shut. But if you don't, well, I think we both know how quickly things can spiral out of control." Emily's heart raced as she realized the full extent of the threat he posed. This was a man with nothing to lose, and he was willing to destroy her life if it meant getting what he wanted. When Jonathan returned home later that day, he found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale and her hands trembling. The encounter with Marcus had shaken her to the core, and she knew she couldn't keep it from Jonathan. With a heavy heart, she told him everything about Marcus, his demands, and the threat he posed to their new life. As she spoke, Jonathan's expression grew darker, the weight of the situation settling over them like a thick fog. They were faced with an impossible choice: give in to Marcus's demands and by his silence, or stand their ground and risk everything. Jonathan's first instinct was to protect Emily, to do whatever it took to keep her safe, even if it meant paying Marcus off. But as he thought it over, he realized that this was not a solution, it was only a temporary fix, one that would leave them vulnerable to further blackmail in the future. They had already been living in the shadow of Emily's past for too long, and he couldn't bear the thought of continuing down that path. "Emily, we can't give in to him," Jonathan said finally, his voice firm with resolve. "We've spent so long hiding from the truth, trying to protect ourselves from the past. But if we keep doing that, we'll never be free. We need to stand up to Marcus, to take control of our own lives. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that I'm tired of living in fear. We need to face this together, no matter what the consequences might be." Emily looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. She knew he was right, but the thought of confronting Marcus, of potentially exposing everything, terrified her. Yet, deep down, she also knew that this was the only way to truly move forward. Emily knew that the time had come to confront her past head-on. She had spent too long running, hiding, and living in fear of what might happen if the truth ever came out. But now, with Jonathan by her side, she felt a renewed sense of courage, a determination to take control of her own life, no matter the cost. It was a decision that didn't come easily, but one that she knew was necessary if they were ever to find peace. Together, Emily and Jonathan prepared to face Marcus, knowing that their future depended on how they handled this confrontation. Emily reached out to a lawyer, someone she trusted to guide them through the legal complexities of the situation. They also began gathering evidence, proof of Marcus's threats, as well as documentation of Emily's past, so they would be ready if the truth ever came to light. It was a daunting process, but one that brought them closer together as they worked side by side to protect their future. When the day of the confrontation finally arrived, Emily felt a mix of fear and resolve. She knew that Marcus would not back down easily, but she also knew that this was their chance to break free from the chains of the past. Jonathan stood by her side, his presence a source of strength and comfort. As they faced Marcus together, Emily felt a sense of empowerment that she hadn't felt in years. She was no longer the scared, guilt-ridden woman who had been running from her past. She was ready to fight for her future, and nothing would stand in her way. The confrontation with Marcus was intense. He arrived at their home, confident and smug, certain that he held all the power. But Emily and Jonathan were prepared. They had gathered enough evidence to expose Marcus for his crimes, both past and present, and they were ready to use it. When Marcus began to threaten them, demanding money in exchange for his silence, Emily stood her ground. "We're not afraid of you anymore, Marcus," she said, her voice steady. "We know what you've done, and we have the proof. If you don't back off, we'll take this to the authorities. You won't be able to hurt us, or anyone else, ever again." Marcus's smug demeanor faltered, replaced by anger. "You think you can outsmart me?" he sneered. "You don't know who you're dealing with." But Jonathan stepped forward, holding up the evidence they had collected. "We know exactly who we're dealing with, Marcus. And we're done being your victims. This ends now." The standoff was tense, with Marcus realizing that he had lost control. For a moment, it seemed as though he might lash out, but then he saw the determination in Emily and Jonathan's eyes. He knew they were serious, that they wouldn't back down. With a snarl, he turned and left, but not before warning them that this wasn't over. "You may have won this round, but you'll never escape your past," he hissed. "It will always haunt you." But as Marcus disappeared into the night, Emily and Jonathan knew that they had won a significant victory. They had stood up to their fears, and while the road ahead was still uncertain, they were no longer running. Despite their victory over Marcus, Emily knew that they couldn't fully move on until the truth was out in the open. The threat of exposure would always linger, and she couldn't live her life looking over her shoulder. After consulting with their lawyer, Emily made the difficult decision to go public with her story. It was a terrifying prospect, but one that she knew was necessary if they were ever to find peace. Emily held a press conference, her heart pounding as she stood before the gathered reporters and cameras. Jonathan was by her side, his presence a reassuring constant. As she began to speak, her voice trembled at first, but she quickly found her strength. She told her story about the affair, the scandal, and the tragic accident that had claimed Lydia's life. She spoke of the guilt and regret that had haunted her for years, and the fear that had driven her to keep it all hidden. But most importantly, she spoke of her desire to move forward, to live a life free from the shadows of the past. The media frenzy was immediate and intense. Headlines blared the details of Emily's past, and for a time, it seemed as though the entire world was focused on her story. The public's reaction was mixed. Some were sympathetic, understanding that she had been young and made mistakes, while others were harsh, condemning her actions and questioning her character. But through it all, Emily remained strong, knowing that she had done the right thing. She had taken control of her life, and now, no one, not even Marcus, could hold her past against her. The days following the press conference were a whirlwind of emotions for both Emily and Jonathan. The media storm had taken its toll, and they found themselves under constant scrutiny. Reporters camped outside their house, neighbors whispered behind their backs, and the phone rang incessantly with calls from journalists seeking more details. It was exhausting, overwhelming, and at times, it felt like they were living in a fishbowl, with no escape from the prying eyes of the world. But despite the chaos, there was also a sense of relief. By going public, Emily had taken away Marcus's power over them. He could no longer threaten them with exposure, no longer use her past as a weapon to control their lives. For the first time in years, Emily felt a sense of freedom, a freedom that came from owning her truth, no matter how painful it had been to reveal. She knew that the road ahead would still be difficult, but at least now, she and Jonathan could face it together, without the burden of secrecy weighing them down. Their marriage, however, was still fragile. The scars of the past ran deep, and the trust that had been shattered would take time to rebuild. They continued to attend therapy, working through the complex emotions that had been brought to the surface by the revelations and the media attention. There were days when it felt like they were making progress, and days when it seemed like the wounds were too deep to heal. But through it all, they held on to the hope that, with time, they could find their way back to each other. Emily knew that there was one more thing she needed to do if she was ever going to find true peace. She needed to face the people she had hurt the most, Lydia's family. It was a daunting prospect, one that filled her with dread, but she knew that she couldn't move forward without seeking their forgiveness. The thought of facing them, of seeing the pain she had caused etched into their faces, was almost unbearable, but it was a necessary step in her journey toward redemption. With Jonathan by her side, Emily reached out to Lydia's family, requesting a meeting. She wasn't sure if they would agree, but to her surprise, they did. The meeting took place at Lydia's parents' home, a modest house filled with memories of their daughter. As Emily walked through the door, she felt a wave of emotions: guilt, shame, fear. But she knew she had to do this. She owed it to Lydia, to her family, and to herself. The conversation that followed was one of the most difficult of Emily's life. Lydia's parents were understandably angry, their grief still raw even after all these years. But as Emily spoke, as she apologized and expressed her deep regret for the pain she had caused, something unexpected happened. Lydia's mother, who had been silent for most of the conversation, reached out and took Emily's hand. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I can see that you're truly sorry. And I believe that Lydia wouldn't want us to hold on to this anger forever." It wasn't a complete forgiveness, but it was a start, a small glimmer of hope that maybe, one day, the wounds could begin to heal. The meeting with Lydia's family marked a turning point for Emily. It was the first step in a long process of healing, both for her and for those she had hurt. As she and Jonathan continued to work on their marriage, Emily found herself more committed than ever to making amends for the mistakes of her past. She began volunteering at a local support group for people who had been affected by infidelity and loss, sharing her story in the hopes that it might help others avoid the same mistakes she had made. Jonathan, too, found himself changing as a result of everything they had been through. He had always prided himself on being strong, on keeping his emotions in check, but the events of the past few months had forced him to confront his own vulnerabilities. He realized that true strength wasn't about hiding his pain, but about facing it head-on and allowing himself to feel the full range of emotions that came with it. Through therapy and self-reflection, he began to understand that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting the past, but about choosing to move forward despite it. Together, Jonathan and Emily slowly began to rebuild their relationship, brick by brick. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the pain of the past threatened to overwhelm them. But each time, they chose to fight for each other, to fight for the love they still shared. They learned to communicate in ways they never had before, to be open and honest about their fears and insecurities. And as they did, they found that their love, though battered and bruised, was still strong, still worth fighting for. It was a love that had been tested by fire and had come out the other side, stronger and more resilient than ever. As the months passed, Jonathan and Emily found themselves rediscovering each other in ways they hadn't anticipated. The trauma they had endured had changed them both, but it had also deepened their understanding of what it meant to love someone unconditionally. They began to see each other not just as the people they had been, but as the people they were becoming, flawed, yes, but also capable of growth and change. Their relationship took on a new dimension, one that was more grounded in reality than the idealized version of love they had once clung to. They learned to appreciate the small moments of connection, the quiet conversations over coffee, the shared laughter at a joke only they understood. These moments, though simple, became the foundation of their new life together, a life built on honesty, acceptance, and a deep respect for each other's journey. Emily, in particular, found herself growing in ways she hadn't expected. The experience of facing her past, of owning her mistakes and seeking redemption, had given her a new sense of purpose. She continued her work with the support group, finding fulfillment in helping others navigate the complexities of love and forgiveness. She also began to explore new interests, taking up painting and writing as a way to express the emotions that had been buried for so long. Through it all, Jonathan was her biggest supporter, encouraging her to pursue her passions and celebrating her achievements, no matter how small. With the worst of the storm behind them, Jonathan and Emily decided to move forward with their plans to start fresh in a new town. The process of selling their house and finding a new one was both exciting and daunting, but it also felt like the right thing to do. The house they had shared for so many years was filled with memories, both good and bad, and while they would always carry those memories with them, they knew that a change of scenery was necessary if they were going to truly move forward. As they packed up their belongings, they found themselves reminiscing about the life they had shared in that house, the early days of their marriage, the laughter and joy, the struggles and tears. It was a bittersweet process, but one that also brought them closer together. They were leaving behind the ghosts of the past, but they were also carrying with them the lessons they had learned, the strength they had gained, and the love that had endured. Their new town was smaller, quieter, and more peaceful than the bustling suburb they had left behind. It was a place where they could focus on themselves, on each other, and on the future they were building together. As they settled into their new home, they found a sense of peace that had eluded them for so long. The road ahead was still uncertain, but they were facing it together, with a renewed sense of hope and determination. They had been through the fire, but they had come out stronger, more united, and more in love than ever. Just as they were beginning to feel settled in their new life, a new challenge emerged, one that threatened to upend the fragile peace they had worked so hard to achieve. Emily received an unexpected phone call from an old acquaintance, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. The person on the other end of the line was Rachel, a woman who had been close to Lydia and had known about the affair. Rachel had moved away shortly after Lydia's death, but now she was back, and she had something she needed to tell Emily. Rachel's voice was tense, filled with a sense of urgency. She told Emily that there was something about Lydia's death that had never come to light, something that could change everything. Emily's heart raced as she listened, her mind spinning with possibilities. What could Rachel possibly have to say after all these years? Was there another secret waiting to be uncovered, another layer of guilt and pain that she would have to face? The thought was terrifying, but Emily knew that she couldn't ignore it. She had come too far, fought too hard to rebuild her life, to let another secret destroy it all. Jonathan could see the worry in Emily's eyes as she recounted the phone call. He knew that whatever Rachel had to say could potentially undo all the progress they had made, but he also knew that they couldn't run from it. "We'll face it together," he said, his voice steady and reassuring. "Whatever it is, we'll deal with it. We've come this far, and we're not going to let anything tear us apart now." Emily nodded, drawing strength from his words. She knew that they were stronger together, and no matter what Rachel had to reveal, they would face it head-on. Rachel's revelation turned out to be even more shocking than Emily had imagined. She told them that on the night of Lydia's death, there had been a witness, someone who had seen Lydia's car veer off the road and crash into the tree. This witness had never come forward, fearing the repercussions, but now, years later, they had contacted Rachel, wanting to set the record straight. The witness claimed that Lydia hadn't been alone in the car that night. David had been with her, and they had been arguing when the accident occurred. The news hit Emily like a punch to the gut. All these years, she had believed that Lydia's death was partly her fault, that her affair with David had driven Lydia to her tragic end. But now, it seemed that there was more to the story, that David had been involved in a way she had never imagined. The revelation brought back all the pain and guilt she had worked so hard to overcome, and she found herself questioning everything once again. Jonathan, too, was shaken by the news. The idea that David had been in the car with Lydia, that he might have been responsible for the accident, was almost too much to comprehend. But as they processed the information together, they realized that this was the final test of their relationship. They could choose to let this new revelation tear them apart, to let the ghosts of the past destroy their future. Or they could choose to face it together, to accept that they might never know the full truth, but that they had each other, and that was enough. In the days that followed, Jonathan and Emily made the decision to confront Rachel and the witness, hoping to get to the bottom of what really happened that night. They traveled back to their old town, the place where everything had begun, and where they had both hoped never to return. But this time, they weren't running from the past, they were facing it head-on, determined to find closure and move forward with their lives. The meeting was tense, filled with raw emotions and unresolved questions. The witness, an older man who had been driving behind Lydia's car that night, recounted what he had seen. His story confirmed Rachel's account. David had been in the car, and they had been arguing when Lydia lost control. The details were murky, and the witness couldn't say for sure whether David had played a direct role in the crash, but his testimony was enough to change everything Emily had believed for so long. Despite the pain of revisiting those memories, Emily and Jonathan found strength in each other. They realized that no matter what the truth was, they couldn't let it define them or their relationship. They had been through too much, fought too hard, to let the past destroy their future. And so, they made the choice to stand together, to accept that while they might never have all the answers, they had each other, and that was enough. Returning to their new town, Jonathan and Emily felt a sense of relief and resolution. They had faced their demons, confronted the ghosts of the past, and come out stronger on the other side. It wasn't easy, and there were still days when the pain of what they had been through lingered, but they knew that they had been given a second chance, a chance to rebuild their lives on a foundation of truth and honesty, rather than secrets and lies. Their new life was quieter, simpler, but also more fulfilling. They found joy in the little things, in their morning walks, their evening dinners, the shared laughter and quiet moments of connection. They had learned to appreciate the beauty of an imperfect life, one that was filled with challenges and difficulties, but also with love and hope. They knew that there would always be struggles, but they also knew that they could face them together, and that was what mattered most. Emily continued her work with the support group, finding purpose in helping others navigate their own difficult journeys. Jonathan, too, found fulfillment in his career, but more importantly, in the life he was building with Emily. They were no longer defined by the mistakes of the past, but by the strength they had found in each other. And as they looked toward the future, they knew that they had been given a second chance, a chance to write a new chapter in their lives, one filled with love, hope, and the promise of a brighter tomorrow. With the final chapter of their old life behind them, Jonathan and Emily fully embraced their new beginning. They settled into their new home, making it their own with personal touches and memories that were all theirs. The pain of the past had not disappeared, but it had softened, becoming a part of their story rather than the defining feature. They had learned to live with it, to carry it with them as a reminder of how far they had come, but also of how much they had to look forward to. Their days were filled with simple pleasures, gardening in the backyard, cooking meals together, exploring the small town that had become their refuge. They made new friends, built new routines, and slowly but surely, they began to feel at home. The future no longer felt like a daunting unknown, but like a blank canvas, waiting for them to paint it with the colors of their love and resilience. As they moved forward, Jonathan and Emily made a conscious decision to live each day with intention. They knew that life was unpredictable, that challenges would continue to arise, but they also knew that they had the strength to face whatever came their way. They had been tested, pushed to their limits, but they had emerged stronger, more united, and more in love than ever. And as they looked toward the future, they did so with hope, knowing that no matter what happened, they would always have each other. In the years that followed, Jonathan and Emily found a sense of peace and fulfillment that they had never imagined possible. Their life, once so fragile and uncertain, had become a testament to the power of love, forgiveness, and resilience. They had faced the darkest parts of their past, confronted the secrets that had threatened to tear them apart, and come out the other side stronger and more united than ever. Their journey had been long and difficult, filled with pain and heartache, but it had also been a journey of growth and transformation. They had learned that true love wasn't about perfection, but about acceptance of each other's flaws, mistakes, and pasts. They had learned that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, but about choosing to move forward despite the pain. And they had learned that the truth, no matter how painful, was always worth fighting for. As they looked back on their journey, Jonathan and Emily felt a deep sense of gratitude for each other, for the love they had shared, and for the strength they had found within themselves. They knew that their story was not just about the mistakes they had made, but about the redemption they had found. It was a story of hope, of second chances, and of the enduring power of love. And as they looked toward the future, they did so with a sense of peace, knowing that they had built a life together that was grounded in truth, resilience, and a love that would last a lifetime.